When I introduced the scope chart in the first video, maybe you thought I made a mistake. A number of CEOs I've used it with certainly did. That misunderstanding is actually core to why the scope chart is so powerful. Let me show you why. I'm Chris Williams, also known as CL Will. I've over 40 years of experience building and leading teams, including being a vice president in the Fortune 100. I'm a leadership advisor here to help you be a better and smarter leader. This is the second video in my series on scope, the perspective of your role in the organization. We're looking at scope through the scope chart that I introduced in the first video in the series. If you haven't seen that, you may want to start there. As a reminder, this is the scope chart. We have the organization on the vertical axis, from the individual at the bottom all the way up through the team, division, company, and the outside world. Along the bottom is time, today, this week, this year, and so on to the life of the company. Your job's scope refers to its place on this chart. From the individual contributor down here, worried about today and their team, up through the middle manager, worried about larger parts of the org and over longer periods of time. Finally, at the top is the CEO, whose scope covers the company's place in the world and years into the future. When I first showed the scope chart to a CEO, they strenuously objected. They said, "You don't get it. The role gets so much bigger. That bubble should get bigger as you go up." The truth is, when I first imagined the chart, it did. You see, I've been a manager. I've been promoted higher and higher in a company, all the way to VP at a Fortune 100. And dear me, those roles get enormous as you go up. The bubble just had to get bigger. But then I realized it didn't. Or if it did, it only got a little bigger, because the scale on the two axes account for that. Yes, the scope becomes enormous, both for the organization and the time period, whole companies, years and decades, but the logarithmic scale on the axes takes that into account. It goes from an individual through to the world, and from a day to decades. More importantly, and this is the real point, you're still just one person. While you may be able to expand your reach a little through experience, no one person can do it all. At the scale of a large corporation, no single person deals with the scope of an entire division, let alone an entire company. The harsh reality is that the CEO role isn't that much bigger. It's just different. Very different, to be sure, but what gets bigger is the scope of the impact, the size of the organization, and the span of the time they worry about. I'll be honest, most CEOs don't like that characterization. They think of themselves as pretty big fish in their pond. They have to justify that compensation package somehow. But the great ones realize that I'm right, that the consistent size of the bubble is accurate. The jobs are different, but there's just one person doing it, whether they're at the bottom of this chart or at the top. A better way to think about this, to drive this point home, is to look at how scope and scale are related, how the scope chart scales for organizations of radically different sizes. Let's consider a sole proprietor, for example, just a single person working for themselves. Perhaps a freshly minted entrepreneur with that startup gleam in their eye, or perhaps a consultant or social media content creator. For them, the chart looks like this, one enormous bubble. They have to worry about everything. Down at the bottom here, they are the organization. They're doing the work, making the copies, filming the videos, sending the invoices. On the time front, they're living just day to day. But they're also handling things a middle manager might be doing, planning ahead to next week and next month. And that gleam in their eye, yeah, that's a year or two out in the future here. At the top of the chart, they are the one and only interface to the outside world. They are the one plotting the long-term future they envision for the company. So in the end, they're one big bubble, doing the whole thing, from individual contributor to CEO. But as the organization scales, you start to see where the scope chart makes sense, and why the roles don't get bigger, just different. When you first hire someone for your fledgling business, you don't hire a CEO, you hire someone to help get things done. That probably looks like this. The first hire is someone down near the origin of the chart. The entrepreneur is still the face of the company, making the big decisions, still handling the planning. Notice, too, how the roles overlap. That's because the boss and the employee need to interact, and they're both working together on some aspects. Maybe it's a big order that needs to get out. Maybe the employee helps with some of the PR to the outside world. Maybe it's a brainstorming session about the future where everyone has an opinion. And notice the effect adding someone had to the size of the bubble, the scope of the top role. It got smaller. That's in fact why you hired someone, to shrink the entrepreneur's role to something more manageable, to make the overwhelming job of being a solo entrepreneur possible to handle, to get the scope under control. So the bubble, mercifully, gets smaller. As the business grows larger, maybe several people are hired at the bottom. That raises another important point about this chart. Each bubble is not a person, like it might be in an org chart. It's a role. So if you have several people helping to get the day-to-day work done, it's still just one role. In a traditional org chart, each person is shown. You see a lot of people as multiple bubbles at the same level. But in the scope chart, each bubble is not a person, but a role. Just remember that each bubble is one or more persons at that level. Moving larger, if you're lucky, the business grows. You end up with 6, 8, or 10 or more people at the bottom. Managing the team soon becomes more than the entrepreneur can handle. Just managing the people doing the day-to-day work is a full-time job. They need to hire someone to help in the middle. They need a team leader. And the chart then looks like this. You have someone in the middle managing the team. This frees up the top leader to focus on the larger world and the longer term, making the crucial decisions that impact the future of the company. Notice again, though, that the roles overlap and the team leader is helping with the day-to-day. The individual contributors help lead the team, and the leader at the top is working closely with the team leader as well. But also notice that the top leader does not and should not have an impact on the day-to-day. They simply can't afford the time to be worrying about those things. That is, after all, why they hired all those people, to take that load off. That is what changes the top leader's perspective, their view. They have the advantage of being able to see the company's place in the world or the long-term future, but they lose sight of the details. That's okay, that's intentional, but there's no doubt about the change of perspective. We'll talk more about this in the next video, where we look at the perils of this change in perspective. But one of the nice things about this chart is how clearly you can see the scope of roles at both the top and the bottom. All this reinforces the reasons why the bubble isn't larger. It shouldn't be. Each role is big enough for a single person to handle. Watching this organization grow is a great way to look at scope and scale as a related pair. As the organization scales, it requires the specialization of scope. People at each level of this organization can and need to focus on their role in the organization, their scope in the organization, their view of the span of time. The scope chart is useful for organizations of all sizes. It's especially helpful for entrepreneurs and small business people to understand how best to grow. As they scale, they can pay attention to the scope of each role in it. But it's also helpful to think about a massive multinational corporation using this chart. As more levels get added, it becomes clearer and clearer how each role above frontline manager is really just the same. Just the scope and perspective that goes along with it changes. In this way, the scope chart provides both a roadmap and some comfort to those looking to move up in the hierarchy. As we'll see in later videos, moving up, you can see the next step and the change in scope that needs to happen. That change in scope is the focus of most of the videos in this series. But first, let's look at the downsides. In the next video, we'll talk about how the scope chart can illustrate some bad behaviors in organizations. Behaviors like micromanagement, as we talked about above, and the myth of the clueless CEO. So be sure to subscribe to my channel and click the bell so you won't miss each new video in this series. I'll see you in the next one, The Perils of Scope.